Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening. My name is Russell Brooks. Tonight's show will focus on the first 100 days of the Spanberger administration. What was accomplished to date? What obstacles does she face? What should we expect next? Joining me tonight to discuss these questions is Sam Shirazi. Sam Shirazi is a Virginia-based political analyst and host of the Federal Fallout podcast. Sam Shirazi is well regarded for his keen insights into the complex issues that make up Virginia politics. Sam, welcome to Inside Scoop.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
It's our pleasure. Well, the biggest story over the past week obviously has been the referendum. And in fact, oral arguments concerning the referendum were made today. As we all know, a Tazewell County Circuit judge has attempted to decertify the results of the referendum. And we had a very tight referendum at that. What's your read on what has taken place so far?
Yeah, so it's been a really crazy week in Virginia politics. Less than a week ago, the referendum passed here in Virginia. A narrow vote, and we can talk more about that. And then after that, the judge in Tazewell County, as you noted, very quickly sided with the Republicans and said that the referendum was not valid. This morning, actually, in the Virginia Supreme Court, there were oral arguments, and I think it was not immediately clear how the justices are going to be ruling in that case. So I think the first part of the referendum actually passing, that is done, but it is not 100% clear if it is actually going to be implemented, given some of these legal challenges the Republicans are bringing.
And it gets crazier still. Georgia Republican Representative Rich McCormack seemingly was so upset about the outcome of the referendum that he introduced the Make D.C. Square Again Act, a bill that would return parts of Northern Virginia, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria to the District of Columbia. This process would be known as retrocession. It seems a bit desperate and unlikely to occur, but what does this proposal say about the mood of the Republicans?
Yeah, so if you look at the referendum results, it was a very polarized election. The blue parts of Virginia voted yes in pretty heavy numbers. The red parts of Virginia voted no in pretty heavy numbers. And overall, I think the part of Virginia that really powered yes to victory was Northern Virginia. And there was a sense among Republicans that they tried their best, they brought out their voters, but they still lost. Now, granted, it was a narrow loss, but they lost. And so this proposal, I think, is kind of showing you what the Republicans are thinking, that perhaps they're unable to win in Northern Virginia, and in their mind, the easiest solution is to return part of Northern Virginia into D.C. I think that's a little short-sighted because, one, it's not going to pass, and then two, I think you never want to give up on any group of voters. It's not impossible for the Republicans to perhaps improve their margins in Northern Virginia. Glenn Youngkin was able to do it in 2021. So I think as much as the Republicans were disappointed about this election result, politics can change, the winds can change, so I think they shouldn't give up on Northern Virginia.
Okay, but if they don't give up, what is it going to take for Republicans to do better in Northern Virginia? And let's not leave out the Democrats and their obvious difficulties in rural parts of Virginia. Seemingly, both parties have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, so I think realistically for the rest of the Trump administration, it's going to be very difficult for the Virginia Republicans in Northern Virginia. I think possibly if there's a change in administration after the 2028 election, Northern Virginia Republicans can try to rebuild and figure out a way to win up here. And I agree with you. I think as much as the Democrats won on Tuesday, their brand has hurt in rural Virginia, and there are parts of rural Virginia that were very upset at what happened. And I think it'll make it harder for the Democrats going forward to sell the Democratic brand in rural Virginia. So I don't think it was 100% great night for the Democrats. I do think the close results suggest that there are parts of Virginia that were not happy with what the Democrats were doing.
Now, during the referendum, we also saw this deluge of ads, some of them featuring President Obama and Governor Spanberger on both sides of the issue, which clearly confused a lot of people. But I think for Virginia, more interestingly, seemingly, the governor's approval numbers took a hit. That she did not come off particularly well in the latest Washington Post poll. Is that something that the governor and her advisors are worried about?
Well, I'm sure they're not happy whenever your poll numbers are not as high as they were. If I had to guess, it was a combination of things. I think it was partly the redistricting referendum, which was very polarizing, as I mentioned, and I think part of it was the reality that the Democrats started passing things, and that upset certain people in Virginia. So, we can talk about all that. At the end of the day, I think the governor and her team are probably glad the redistricting referendum is over. They don't have to talk about it anymore. They can talk about other things. They can talk about her agenda, what she's trying to do. So ultimately, I think the best news for Governor Spanberger is, yes, that it passed, but two, that it's over.
And if they were worried, what can they do?
The thing is, Governor Spanberger has a lot of time left in office. In all likelihood, she is probably going to have a trifecta for all 4 years of her term. So there's a lot of things she can still pass. There's a lot of things she can still do. I think at the beginning, there perhaps was more of a focus on going after her from the Republican side because she got such a big win. And so I think there was an intentional effort to try to, drive up her negatives, and that has worked. But she is still not in negative approval. The Washington Post poll, I believe, had her up 1 in terms of the approval. So she's not negative, and I think she can try to work to rebuild some of her approval ratings as she continues to pass bills and do things.
No. The referendum was one big issue for her. Another big issue for her is the fact that the General Assembly sent over 1,000 bills to her. She vetoed 8. She attempted to amend 180. Youngkin vetoed far more than her over his term of office. But in terms of amendments, it's used last year as an example. He only amended 159. Is this an unusual number of amendments that the governor proposed?
I think she wanted to send the message that she's not a rubber stamp, and that she didn't want to veto everything, because I think veto looks pretty harsh, and Governor Youngkin wanted to veto things to send a message. I think she wanted to show that she's her own person. She's not going to defer just to the legislature. And so I think that's what you saw. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. You have checks and balances. You have separate branches of government. That's part of the process. It's happened in the past. Governors often have their own priorities and things that they want to focus on. So I think it's part of the process, and it also shows you that there's a little bit of a time period where I think both sides are feeling each other out in terms of the General Assembly and the governor.
Well, speaking of feeling each other out, one had to note that last week, certainly among some of the more prominent bills, the General Assembly didn't accept the amendments and sent them right back to the governor's desk. Now, that puts her in the position of either vetoing them or letting them pass.
Yeah, I'm sure she'll take a bill-by-bill approach and, make her best judgment. But at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit of a game of chicken. We'll see who blinks first. If I had to guess, I think the governor may end up vetoing some of those bills just because she said that she was she wanted changes. And if the General Assembly didn't give her the changes, then it's her prerogative to veto them if she thinks that's appropriate.
So let's examine some of the more high-profile bills that came her way. Now, here in Fairfax County, a bill that received a lot of attention, and actually, I think quite a few people here were pleased with the governor's action when she did not approve the bill that would have permitted progress on a casino or entertainment district here in Fairfax County, specifically in the Tyson's Corner area. How do you analyze that decision by the governor?
So I think that's the governor really showing her independent streak. And I think the issue of casino, gambling, that is where there's the biggest divide with the General Assembly. It seemed like both the state Senate and the House of Delegates generally were more in favor of these types of gaming proposals, including the casino in Fairfax. And I think Governor Spanberger sent a clear message that she was not going to be supporting that. I think part of it was she could tell maybe specifically with the casino, it was not necessarily popular in Fairfax County. And I think she also wanted to signal that she was independent. She's not going to rubber stamp what the General Assembly does. And she thought this was a good issue for her to try to distinguish herself from the General Assembly.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we all know that Senator Surville was one of the prime sponsors of that legislation. So how's that relationship going between the governor and the majority leader?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of goes to show you that sometimes, even if you're in the same party, if you're in different branches of government, things can be a little bit tense. I mean, I'm sure on certain issues they're going to agree. Some issues they're not going to agree. I'm sure Senator Surville will have to kind of figure out how he's going to move forward with this issue as well as some of the other issues he's working with the governor on. And at the end of the day, that's politics. I mean, they're both politicians. I think they're used to disagreeing, and it goes to show you that sometimes politics is not as easy as you think D versus R. Sometimes it's more, different branches of government, different branches or sections of the General Assembly between the House and the state Senate. So I think it's kind of interesting to see those dynamics now that Virginia is under one-party rule effectively.
Or I guess each third is exercising its own authority under that one-party rule.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's, I think sometimes that gets a negative connotation, like, oh, the Democrats can't work together. But ultimately, I think that's the way the system's supposed to work. I mean, we don't elect a dictator who's one person who gets to choose everything. We elect General Assembly, we elect a governor. They have different interests. They have different, constituencies, and sometimes those aren't going to match up, and, that's fine. And you work that out, and that's the political process. And, politics gets a dirty rap sometimes, but I think, that's how things get hashed out, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.
It sounds as if that's something that oftentimes the public does not necessarily appreciate as much as political analysts such as yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all would like a system where things get done efficiently and quickly, but there's a lot of different stakeholders in charge, and I think it's important for all of them to be heard, both by the governor and the General Assembly.
I would tend to agree. We're going to have to pause our conversation with Sam Shirazi for a short break, so please stay with us when we return with a bit more of our conversation on Virginia politics, when we return with more Inside Scoop. Stay tuned.
So I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. So, poop already. You're making me nervous. So, I can't look at this anymore. So, I really hope he grows out of this for his sake. So
how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth has the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 to 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed. But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the schools. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it, or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm the host, Russell Brooks, joined by my guest, Sam Shirazi, host of the podcast Federal Fallout, and we are talking Virginia politics. Let's continue. We finished up the previous segment talking about sometimes the different points of view that exist between the governor and the General Assembly. I think we saw evidence of that last week when the General Assembly leaders basically sent back the bill pertaining to the marijuana marketplace back to the governor, not accepting her amendments. Among those amendments were she attempted to reduce the number of marijuana retailers from 350 that were in the original bill to 200. She wanted to impose a 6-month delay in implementation. And there would be an increase in the cannabis tax from 6 to 8%, and set the limit on possession to 2 ounces. As I said, the legislature seemingly ignored those amendments and returned the bill to the governor. What does this say about that particular relationship?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is there's a decent chance that there's going to be 3 more sessions, 3 more years where there will be a Democratic trifecta. So I think not every bill has to be done this year. Obviously, it delays things, but perhaps both sides are trying to signal where they are on these issues. And even if Governor Spanberger vetoes it this year, there's still 3 more years where they could work something out. And often you see that sometimes the first go round, it doesn't quite make it for whatever reason, either in the General Assembly or the governor's veto. But subsequently, it gets hashed out, and in another year, it might pass. So I feel like some of these bills, and perhaps that one is something that even if Governor Spanberger vetoes, doesn't mean we won't see it next year or in another year.
Okay. The governor also proposed some amendments to the legislation that would have restricted ICE activity in Virginia. I think the prime sponsor of that legislation was, again, FFS County Senator Saddam Salim. The legislation would have imposed limits on local law enforcement cooperation with ICE. It would have banned the use of masks by ICE officers, and it would have prevented them from making arrests in certain locations, such as courthouses, unless they had a particular warrant. When the governor announced her amendments, specifically the one pertaining to the local law enforcement cooperation with ICE, Senator Salim seemed to be amenable to those amendments. Nevertheless, once again, the leadership returned that bill, minus amendments, to the governor's desk. Again, we have this really, really interesting dynamic taking place. Now, as a former law enforcement officer, maybe this was a particularly fraught issue for Governor Spanberger. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think this is a complicated issue because on one side you have the Democratic base who is really upset at some of the things that have been happening, and they want something to hold ICE and other immigration officials accountable. On the other side, you have Governor Spanberger, who actually got the endorsement of law enforcement in the last governor's election, which was relatively uncommon for a Democrat to get that. And so I think she is trying to balance that, where she's trying to keep law enforcement happy, but I think she understands that this is an important issue for the Democratic base. So we're going to have to see, where does she land on this? Does she end up signing the bill, or does she just veto it because they didn't do her amendments? And I think it'll give you a sense of, one, how independent does she want to seem? Because I think there's this question, is she really trying to appeal more to the middle and try to seem like the moderate that she campaigned on? Or does she maybe focus on some of these priorities that Democrats have and really govern as a true, base politician, for lack of a better word, that she's trying to keep the base happy. I think part of the challenges she's faced so far is that she's been trying to do a little bit of both. She wants to appear to be the moderate, but she also wants to keep the base happy, and sometimes it's not possible. And I think in an issue like this, immigration, law enforcement, it's very fraught, and there's no easy answers. And no matter what she does, it'll get a lot of attention. If she signs it, then I think she'll get a lot of praise from progressive groups, but then on the other end, Republicans will be attacking her. If she vetoes it, I think certainly progressive groups won't be happy, but perhaps she can kind of use that as a way to brush up on her moderate credentials.
He says she wants to appear to be moderate. Based on her congressional record, might it be true that at heart she is moderate, but she has to deal with a legislature that is probably not quite as moderate as she. And so she has to navigate those two poles.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge of being governor versus a member of Congress or a member of a legislative body. In Congress, you can vote no sometimes, and the thing will still pass because you are not the deciding vote. And so you could take some no votes to show you're moderate, but you still allow the bill will still become law. I think the challenge she has as governor, she's in charge. And so she can't get out of it. She either has to say yes or no. I think with these amendments, she was trying to maybe find some wiggle room where she kind of watered down some of these bills or make them seem a little bit more palatable for maybe the middle voter. But again, as you noted, the General Assembly just sent them back to her and maybe sending her a message that, we're not going to agree to these. And I think that's going to be one of the dynamics to watch is how much is Spanberger focused more on the base or she focused more on the middle. It's a fine balance she'll have to walk, and it's harder when you're governor than when you're a member of Congress.
Right. Another example of, again, this interesting dynamic seems to be the bill on assault weapons. There was an attempt to ban certain forms of semi-automatic rifles and shotguns. The governor made some amendments, but in general, it appeared that she was supportive of the bill, but there were some technical things relating to, capacity of some of these weapons, or to make them less onerous for turkey hunters that she attempted to propose. But once again, in this test of wills, or at least what appears to be a test of wills, but the legislature was not having it.
Yeah, I think this is one of those issues where it'll be really interesting to see how she ends up voting, or signing it or not, because I think there is a core group of her supporters who I think really believe in this idea that there needs to be more done on gun violence. And on the other end, you have a lot of Virginians, particularly rural Virginians, who really do believe in the Second Amendment and they don't want any sort of new limits. And I think, again, Governor Spanberger was trying to walk that fine line, and perhaps the General Assembly did not want to give her the out and give her the easy way out. I think they're in some ways making her life difficult, but that's what happens when you're governor, and you got to make the calls. So for a lot of these bills, it'll be interesting to see how she ends up voting, or she ends up signing them or not.
Yeah, and we're taking a theme here. But her position on collective bargaining, on one hand, labor was quite pleased with the increase in the minimum wage for obvious reasons. But her stance on collective bargaining for public employees, labor took quite a negative view of her position in that respect. Labor, as we all know, a core constituency for any Democratic candidate or office holder. Is she burning a bridge to that vital constituency?
Yeah, it's interesting to see the issues that she picks to be more independent on. And I think labor issues, union issues are certainly the ones where I think she's showing more of her independent streak. And I think that goes back to the fact that if you look at her core constituency, or what her core base is, it's really suburban voters And some of them, frankly, used to be Republicans and have become Democrats during the Trump era. And so in that sense, it's not super surprising to me that that's kind of the area where she's maybe a little bit more willing to push back on these organizations, because while they have supported her generally during her career, she is not necessarily the most pro-labor politician. And it kind of makes sense if you think that a lot of her support comes from the suburbs, and that's generally where she kind of had her political start, in the suburbs of Richmond.
No, far more popular across the board was the governor's approval of paid family and medical leave. I believe the General Assembly had no problem with her amendments. How would you describe the governor's position on that type of issue? Does it conform with her overall support to make Virginia more affordable for middle class and working class Virginians?
Yeah, I think this is the type of issue where she really wants to highlight her willingness to do things to help working people and to try to deal with the affordability issue. Obviously, if someone's sick or they have to take care of a family member and there's no safety net for them, that would make their life more difficult. However, I think business and certain groups were not happy necessarily that she signed this, and they said that it was going to raise their costs, and it very well might. But I think, unlike the labor issue, I think my sense was she thought that this was something that would be more popular, and that more people would support it, and it's not as divisive of an issue, perhaps, as some of these labor issues.
Now, speaking of, I guess, an issue where maybe business would be somewhat concerned, I think the bill to create a state-run prescription drug affordability board may fall into that category. The legislature seemingly wanted a board with a bit more teeth. The governor seemingly wanted something that was purely advisory. Is that because, again, business interests may have not looked kindly on a board with some teeth?
Yeah, it's interesting because this was something that Governor Youngkin didn't allow to move forward as well. And I think for whatever reason, both governors have had some issues with this, and maybe it's just one of those issues that's a little bit complicated given the pharmaceutical industry.
Understood. It's time for another short break, so please stay tuned as we continue our conversation with Sam Shirazi when we return with more Inside Scoop.
There. Can I tell you a cat joke? Just kidding. Why did the girl ask the mushroom to dance? Because he was a fun guy. What do you call a pig that knows karate? Pork chop. Why was the basketball court all wet? Why? Because the players kept dribbling all over it. Can I tell you another one? So how does a tissue dance? Put a little boogie on it. What's Beethoven's favorite fruit? Banana. What is a boxer's favorite drink? Fruit punch.
Mom, I got it. What are you doing in there?
I got stuck.
Are you a dog?
I wouldn't do that. Have you seen the pliers? Where'd you find those?
It's not your birthday.
Sorry.
Bye, Grandpa.
Bye, Grandpa.
Take care of yourself.
What are you doing? What are you looking for?
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
I'm Russell Brooks, joined by tonight's guest, political commentator and the host of the podcast, Federal Fallout, Sam Shirazi. The Democrats in the legislature are at an impasse right now regarding the state budget. And this stumbling block seems to be tax incentives for data centers. Now, some legislators want to eliminate the sales and use tax exemption for these data centers, which they claim could add at least $1 billion to the state coffers. Some are probably a bit more supportive of maintaining the tax incentives, and possibly the governor is somewhat sympathetic to that point of view. Now, what does your reporting convey on this particular issue?
Yeah, so I think data centers are going to be one of the next big issues in politics. And I think for a long time, people didn't really know what they were, but basically in Northern Virginia and all across Virginia, data centers are becoming more and more a hot topic because there's a lot of them being built and they use a lot of energy. And as you noted, that there's traditionally been sort of tax incentives to keep them in Virginia. And I think a lot of voters are starting to get upset by the fact that these data centers are popping up everywhere and that they're getting these tax incentives, especially because they're using so much energy. So it's driving up costs in terms of electricity. And anyway, so I think there's this phrase you hear that the data centers should pay their fair share. And I think that means different things to different people. And certainly State Senator Luis Lucas has focused on cutting back on some of these tax incentives, saying they don't need them anymore. I do think other members of the General Assembly and perhaps the governor is concerned about losing this business because naturally there's a lot of states and they will compete for data center business. And Northern Virginia specifically is one of the hubs in the world of data centers, and it's brought a lot of money and a lot of opportunities to Northern Virginia. And I think perhaps people supporting the data centers are worried that that's going to go away. And, you know, there's plenty of states out there that will probably give better deals to the data centers. And if Virginia starts taxing them, that's the concern that's really out there. And so I'm curious to see how this impasse is broken. And perhaps there might be a compromise that maybe everyone can live with. Because my sense is no one really wants to see the data centers completely go away. At the same time, there has to be a recognition that they are causing a lot of issues and that they have to pay for those issues.
Sure. Is there sort of a disconnect between the viewpoints of local authorities and the state authorities when it comes to these data centers? Seemingly, local officials are still chasing after the data centers, obviously for the tax dollars, the jobs that they provide, while, as you note, increasingly, seemingly, those at the state level are becoming a bit more skeptical of them.
I think it really depends on where you're looking. And Northern Virginia, for a long time, the local officials really were very pro-data center. I think they're starting to hear their constituencies who are raising concerns about these things. And I think even at the local level, there are more hesitation to do data centers. But it depends on the county. Some counties perhaps need the revenue or are more economically depressed. I think perhaps I haven't heard of a solution where there's more of a statewide focus and trying to perhaps push these data centers to areas that are a little more needing of them. One of the things I hear in Northern Virginia is that we're running out of land. We don't have the land for it. We don't need them anymore. Why are they keep building them in Northern Virginia? And there's obviously other parts of Virginia that could use them in terms of the tax revenue and the jobs. But there doesn't seem to be that sort of coordinated statewide plan for these data centers. And I think there's that tension where they don't want to necessarily trample on local officials, but perhaps it would be better if there is more regulation at the state level.
I want to bring up a couple of things that I haven't heard of much so far in the first 100 days. Last year, there was a lot of concern about the plight of federal workers who lost their jobs due to these DOGE-related cutbacks in the federal government. Seemingly, there was at least some concern that maybe there could be something done on the state level to assist these workers. What has been done, if anything?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think particularly given how much of an issue it was in 2025 and how it really powered the Democrats' victory, you would think there'd be a little bit more about the former federal employees and people who have been affected by DOGE and the rifts. I think there's some easy things that, frankly, that could be done either through legislation or through executive action. For example, obviously, a lot of the federal employees are in Northern Virginia. Much of the state government is in Richmond. And so creating more virtual opportunities or remote jobs in Northern Virginia for state government so that people can live in Northern Virginia but work for the Virginia state government, I think that's an easy way to perhaps help former federal employees who bring a lot of skills that could potentially be helpful in Virginia state government. So I hope that there may be more focus on that, because my sense was there were a lot of bills that the Democrats had wanted to get done, but Governor Youngkin had vetoed. And so they brought back a lot of those bills, and many of them might make sense, but I think there also needs to be recognition that this is 2026, things are different. And as you note, a lot of former federal workers supported the Democrats because I think they wanted action done, and it perhaps would be better if there was more attention paid to that.
Another thing that may become more interesting as we get closer to the midterms is the possibility that there could be federal actions to interfere in the midterm elections or suppress the vote of certain groups during the midterm elections. Have you heard much about how the state government is planning for these possibilities?
Well, the nice thing about Virginia is I think both sides have traditionally been very supportive of the nonpartisan election process. And Virginia is known for being a state that does a good job counting ballots. People believe in the process. I think that's still true, but I agree with you that there's a risk in this election and then in the midterms that there'll be more doubts cast or things done to try to, perhaps complicate the results. But ultimately, I'm hopeful that the traditional Virginia system of elections, which has been pretty fair and I think both sides really pride themselves on, can continue in Virginia. And I'm hoping both sides in the General Assembly are able to kind of continue to support that.
Mm-hmm. I read an interesting piece by a commentator like yourself in trying to explain Virginia politics. Supposedly the maxim goes, governors come and go, but the legislature is forever. In other words, the legislature views governors plural, as temporary administrators, while the legislature actually drives policy. In your experience, is that how legislators actually view the governor?
Well, Virginia is unique. It's the only state in the country where a governor cannot run for re-election directly. They can only serve one term, and then they have to wait 4 years, and then they can run again if they want. And I think that drives some of that perception that, one way or another, the governor is going to be gone eventually, whereas we're going to still be here. To a certain extent, that's true everywhere. I think it's just one of those things where the governors have to work with the General Assembly, no matter which governor it is. I think Governor Youngkin found that out. And so I guess the advice would be, no matter who's governor, it's probably a good idea to work with the General Assembly, have good relationships, because they are co-equal branch of government and they can help you do a lot of things, or they can stop a lot of the things you want to do.
So speaking of someone that governors have to manage to get along with one way or another, Senate Finance Committee Chair Louise Lucas. If there is one legislator who can make life difficult, I think she would be that one, as former Governor Glenn Youngkin certainly found out. What have you seen in terms of how well our current governor is getting along with the esteemed senator?
Well, I think Governor Spanberger recognizes that State Senator Louise Lucas is powerful and that she has her opinions and that it's hard to move her. So I suspect that they're going to try to figure out a way to work with each other and especially on the data center issue, come up with a compromise. And I think it's a good idea for any governor to not underestimate State Senator Louise Lucas. I think Governor Youngkin found that out with his proposed arena in Alexandria. And earlier this year, we found that out when the Democrats ended up with a 10-1 map for the redistricting, which was what State Senator Louise Lucas had pushed. So I think even though she's not necessarily the state Senate majority leader, in many ways, she's very powerful and she gets to call a lot of the shots in the state Senate.
And another relationship that also should be key to the success of the governor is her relationship with Speaker Don Scott. What have you seen in terms of that relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Speaker Scott has a big majority, and I think he also feels that he has a mandate to do what he thinks makes sense. But there's an old axiom in Virginia politics that really the opposition is not the other side, it's the other house. And so I think no matter who's in charge, the General Assembly and the House of Delegates often fight with each other. And I think in some ways they've gotten a lot along and they were able to pass a lot of bills. But I think this data center issue is the last one that they can't quite seem to come to agreement on.
But they have to pass a budget one way or another. How soon do you believe we will see some type of progress?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard to tell. The General Assembly was in session. They were back in Richmond trying to hash this out. And I'm curious to see, does the governor come in? Does she try to mediate? Does she, what is her role? It's one of those things that, sometimes the money is the most difficult because there's only a finite amount. And perhaps you can try to grow the pie with the data center tax incentives, but everyone wants to have their priorities funded, and there's only so much money. And I think the budget is always a difficult issue and something that typically is worked out behind the scenes where there's kind of a deal behind the scenes. So we're probably not going to know too much about the final outcome until it is finally announced.
Sure. Now, one, card that the governor has that can be very useful in this sort of situation are the former members of the legislature that are now working for her, such as one example, former delegate Mark Sickles, who is involved in these financial matters. Do you believe they can be particularly useful in helping her navigate this situation with the legislature?
Yeah, I certainly think former members of the General Assembly are often the best people. They know how it works, and they are the ones that the current legislature is trust. So it'd be good for Governor Spanberger to listen to that.
Hopefully it will work out. Once again, we must take a short break, and then we will continue our final segment. We will return with more of our conversation with Sam Shirazi and more of this very interesting show on Inside Speak.
Saving for retirement might be easy for some folk, but for others, it might take a little more work. And for those who haven't started, there are still things you can do to catch up.
Oh, that is good news.
Like getting out from underneath past debt. And don't get wrapped up with high-interest credit cards.
Get you some eyes.
Be diversified with your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Your financial goals are not out of reach. The choice is clear. For a happy ending, choose to save.
Everyone with alcohol and drug addiction is in the same boat. With treatment, you can find solid ground. For drug and alcohol information and treatment referral for you or someone you know, call 1-800-662-HELP.
Dude, are you sure you want this tattoo? Because just do it.
Some mistakes in life are permanent. Like hearing loss. To learn how to protect your hearing, visit asha.org.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. But it's always the same basket, and it's always in the same place. And then she acts so surprised when I find them, but, she's putting them in the same basket. Again. It's like, hello? That's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Hi, I'm Russell Brooks, and now let's continue with Sam Shirazi. I've read that it might be useful for the governor to get out and travel more, to get back out and around the state. Do you see a Richmond bubble, if I can call it that, presenting a problem for Governor Spanberger?
Well, I think she'll hopefully have some more time now to go out and travel the state. I know people don't want to hear it, but it's tough being a politician. It's tough being a governor. So when Governor Spanberger first came into office, she had to make a lot of appointments. She has to review all of these bills that get passed. It's, she signs a lot of them, and you only really hear about the ones she amends or vetoes, but there's a lot of bills, a lot of stuff to go through. And Governor Spanberger is the type of person who likes to do her homework, likes to put her head down and do the hard work. So as much as I'm sure she would like to be out there talking to the voters, there's also the voters elected her to do the job. And I think she has to do the job. And I think that's part of the challenge of being governor is you're trying to balance everything. Whereas if you're in opposition, the Republicans, they don't have much to do these days because they're in the minority in the General Assembly. They can spend all day attacking the governor, attacking the Democrats. So I think now, perhaps once the budget is finalized and the General Assembly is done for the year, there may be an opportunity for Governor Spanberger to hit the road, talk to different parts of Virginia, perhaps go to rural parts of Virginia, which I think, has felt perhaps a little bit neglected after this redistricting referendum, and be able to, as you say, perhaps improve her image and her approval ratings. Because I think, these past few months she's been busy, and the Republicans have spent a lot of time attacking her.
Mm-hmm. Have you noted or any weakening among the coalition that helped win the election for Spanberger? We talked a little bit about Labor's discomfort with some of the decisions that have been made. On the other hand, as we noted, she's also done some things that they've been quite pleased by. So it takes a broad coalition for a Democrat to win. Is she keeping it together?
I think right now she is, and I think the advantage she has is that the party in the White House are the Republicans, Donald Trump's in the White House, and that is primarily going to be driving most of what's going on in the country. I mean, she can do things as a governor, but realistically, a lot of these things are set at the national level if we're talking about inflation and gas prices and all those things. So I think Governor Spanberger has been able to maintain her coalition mainly because of the national environment. And, I think it's one of those things that ultimately she is the leader of the Virginia Democrats, and the Virginia Democrats overall have been doing well during both of Trump's administrations. So I think that's going to continue.
Mm-hmm. And how's the governor's relationship with her running mates, Lieutenant Governor Hashmi and Attorney General Jay Jones?
Yeah, I think they each seem to be pretty independent. My sense is Lieutenant Governor Hashmi has been able to oversee her role in the state Senate as the person in charge of the state Senate, because that's one of the roles of the Lieutenant Governor. And obviously, the state Senate knows her well because she was a state senator. So I think in that sense, perhaps that's where Hashmi's doing her role is in the General Assembly, in the state Senate. And then Attorney General Jay Jones has been very busy, not just with the redistricting litigation, but also generally the various lawsuits that he's joined. And I think Governor Spanberger is not an attorney, and so I think she's kind of deferring to Jay Jones on more of the legal things. So in some ways, they kind of balance each other out, where she's focused on more of the executive functions. Lieutenant Governor Hashmi is focused on some of the legislative work, and then Attorney General Jones is able to focus on the legal issues.
It's interesting that you mentioned Hashmi's possible role in sort of translating what's taking place in the legislature for the governor, since obviously the governor did not serve in Richmond, and at least some of your fellow commentators believe governors are oftentimes handicapped by that lack of experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because we haven't had a governor who served in the General Assembly since Governor Northam. Governor Youngkin did not serve in the General Assembly, and I think in some ways that probably hurt him, and there was a lot of issues he had because he wasn't able to get things through the General Assembly. And I wonder if Governor Spanberger will need to use some of the expertise, for example, people like Lieutenant Governor Hashmi have, to figure out how to work in the General Assembly. Governor Spanberger was a member of the legislative body. She was in D.C., but I think Congress is very different to the General Assembly, and I think there's a lot of things that you have to learn. And this first session, as I mentioned, is in some ways for both sides, I think a little bit of feeling out, a little bit of growing pains. They're going to be with each other for another 3 years. In all likelihood, it's going to be a Democratic majority. So I think there's time to really figure out that relationship.
And how is the governor doing with folks like yourself in the Fifth Estate, the news media? Is she and her team viewed as effective communicators?
So I think Governor Spanberger is dealing with the issue of a changed media landscape. I think the old school media or the mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, I think has a good relationship with Spanberger. And I think Spanberger does well when she's dealing with the traditional broadcast and news outlets. They view her as kind of someone who's effective communicator. I think the challenge she's facing is the rise of this, separate news information system on the right. And there's been a lot of attacks from the right wing, a lot of things thrown against her. And I think that's where she's challenging. She's seeing more of challenges. And I think she's trying to figure out how does she counter that, because the traditional media has gotten less important and partisan media on both sides have gotten more important. So I think part of her response will probably be to use more of the left-leaning partisan media to amplify her message. And I think in the more traditional media, she will try to counter some of these narratives that are being put out there on the right-wing media.
What are some of those examples of the left-leaning, non-traditional media that she might be able to utilize?
Yeah, so there are certainly podcasts. My podcast is nonpartisan.
Like Federal Fallout?
Well, Federal Fallout is nonpartisan, so I don't take sides. But there are certainly left-leaning podcasts. There are left-leaning social media accounts that have a lot of followers. So I think getting her message out through those channels is going to be important because, as I mentioned, for whatever reason, I think after she got such a big win in 2025, a lot of the right-leaning news outlets have started to go after her. And it's interesting because in New Jersey, the governor got a similar big win, but you don't hear a lot about her. You don't hear a lot about attacks against her. And I think Spanberger has been getting the brunt of the attacks.
Well, Spanberger did do the response to the State of the Union.
Yeah.
And the governor in Virginia only gets to serve one term. So naturally, it hasn't happened yet. It's only been 100 days, but soon enough, people will be speculating about what she could do next. And so maybe if you're part of the opposition, you want to start taking your swings now.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, in politics, if someone's not attacking you, that's probably a bad sign. Probably means, you're not important enough to attack. So I think part of it is she got the big win. To your point, I think Republicans are probably nervous about what she might be able to do in her future, and they want to attack her as much as possible. And I think in some ways she could wear that as almost a badge of honor to say that, I've taken these hits, and perhaps her approval has gone down a little bit because of that. But at the same time, she is still net positive approval in Virginia. And I think there's an opportunity for her, whatever she ends up doing next, to kind of continue building on her electoral success, because she's never lost an election. She's won 3 congressional campaigns, and she won the governor's campaign by a lot.
With that in mind, do you see her campaigning a great deal in the upcoming midterm elections, both here in Virginia, where certainly the Democrats want to make the redistricting pay off for them, but also there's a possibility, I would think, that candidates around the country might like to have a popular governor coming to their states and maybe burnish their credentials, especially if they want to portray themselves as being relatively moderate.
So I think in Virginia, certainly she's going to do a lot. Regardless of what we have, the old maps or the new maps, she's going to want to flip districts under the new maps. Obviously, she'll want to flip 4 under the old maps. If they still stay on the books, she'll want to flip at least 2. I think the question of going outside Virginia is interesting, because I think that's what got Governor Youngkin in trouble in 2022. He got not a big win, but he got a surprising win, I'd say, in 2021. And then he quickly hit the road in 2022 and traveled to a bunch of states. I think a lot of people criticized him for that, for perhaps, getting his eye off of Virginia. So I think Spanberger sensitive to that, and she doesn't want to make it seem, especially in her first year in office, that she's not focusing on Virginia.
So we've covered a lot of ground tonight, but what will you be keeping your eye on in the months to come?
So the next thing, probably it's coming in May, is going to be the Supreme Court ruling in Virginia on the redistricting referendum. We'll finally get the answer. Is it going to be the old maps or the new maps? And then the next thing after that is going to be the primaries for the congressional districts. I think that's going to be very interesting, regardless if it's on the old maps or the new maps. I think the new maps are going to be perhaps more interesting just because they're so different. We're going to see, particularly in the new proposed 7th district, a very crowded primary with a lot of Democrats running. And then the incumbent Republicans are going to have to figure out what are they going to do. Are they going to run for re-election in their in these new districts? Or perhaps does one of them go in the 9th against the current incumbent, Morgan Griffin, and try to have a primary to see who can win that district?
Yes, as you mentioned, there seems to be a wealth of candidates in the 7th district, congressional district. Does anyone particularly stand out to you at this point in time? And again, I recognize it's very, very early.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot of candidates who have different backgrounds. I would say, for the most part, the elected officials do have a leg up because they're obviously already been elected and they serve part of the district. So currently there is State Senator Saddam Salim, who's running from Fairfax. There is State Senator, House of Delegates member Dan Helmer from Fairfax. There's also Elizabeth Guzman, who's a delegate from Prince William County. And there's Adele McClure, who's a delegate from Arlington County. But those are the elected officials. But there's also someone else running, the former First Lady of Virginia, Dorothy McAuliffe. And I think she obviously has name ID from her time as being First Lady of Virginia. So crowded primary, I think McAuliffe has the name ID. And if one of the other delegates or state senator is able to kind of break through, use their previous elected experience to make a difference in that primary, they might be able to pull it out.
Mm-hmm. And what would you anticipate would enable somebody to sort of break out from the pack?
I think part of it is realistically money. In politics, money matters, and being able to run ads and get your name out there, and then also just hitting the doors is important too.
Always. Well, we've had a great discussion tonight, but we're out of time. So let me thank Sam Shirazi. It was a great conversation, and I hope you will come back soon.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And thank you, the audience, for tuning in, and please join us again next week for another edition of Inside Scoop. Good night.